Welcome to the Stock Out. This is your show at FreightWaves, where we set aside about 25 minutes to talk about what's happening in the CPG industry, the consumer packaged goods industry. I'm your host, Mike Baudendistel. I'm the head of intermodal solutions here at FreightWaves. I do a lot with intermodal data on the data side of the business, and also do some content creation here at FreightWaves related to intermodal and CPG industry. And today on the CPG show, we're going to be talking about tracking and tracing in the consumer goods space. There's some new FDA regulations that the food industry is scrambling to comply with. I'll talk through those as kind of a review. Those went into effect in late last year, for the implementation in 2026. So I'll talk through a little bit about that. And then I'm going to be interviewing Michael Johnson. He's the CEO of Metrc. That's a software and data company that tracks the legal cannabis industry from seed to sale, mainly on behalf of state government. So we'll learn more about that. Seems like a critical business in a growing industry. Really seems like it would help sellers and manufacturers play by the rules, really sort of protect those that enter into the agreement with the state governments to abide by the rules of the state, delivering safe products, and then from the government's perspective, making sure that they get the tax revenue that they had intended. So that'll be interesting. And before I do those things, if anyone is not already signed up for the CPG newsletter, do a newsletter that comes out every Wednesday. One of many newsletters we have at FreightWaves to keep you up to date on the freight industry and supply chains. All you have to do is go to www.freightwaves.com. Go up to newsletters, and it's going to be the first one there under supply chain. So encourage you to do that. And I also encourage you to attend our conference on June 21st and 22nd in Cleveland. It's going to be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Should be a great time. Lots of good speakers there, and some speakers that pertain specifically to the CPG industry here. Nestle, Coca-Cola, and L'Oreal. So you basically have the biggest food and beverage company, and then the biggest packaged beverage company, and the biggest cosmetics company. And then we're also going to have a shipper-only roundtable where CPG companies and other shippers can compare notes on what they're seeing in the marketplace, maybe compare strategies to deal with the loose freight market, how to maybe position themselves for when the freight market ultimately turns and it's tight again. So I'll go through just one, CPG news story here, and this is really kind of a review of what happened late last year. Is the FDA came out with new regulations for food traceability that are going to be implemented by January 20th of 2026. So they gave them about 3 years to comply from the time that the regulation was issued. It's in the 600-page report. It does seem like it's a lot to unpack, a lot to comply with. But it does seem like this is going to be a big trend in consumer goods when you have things like the baby formula shortage of the last year and a half. Reports of bad peanut butter, the leafy greens causing problems, even things like cereal and the supposed Lucky Charms issue. So all those things, I think are going to be big things that the CPG industry is going to try to comply with. There is this food traceability list that the FDA rolled out. Have a graphic that shows a little bit of a part of that. So this is just a snippet of it that shows cheese, and it sort of goes on to include shellfish, nut butters, leafy greens, among other things. And so these industry participants are going to have to comply with collecting and providing certain data points at certain times of transformational events and handoffs. Basically, when one party takes delivery of the cheese from the manufacturer to the distributor, that's going to have to be recorded. And so the objective is when there's some contamination or spoilage, that it can be resolved quicker, where they know not just sort of what happened, but exactly where it happened in the supply chain. So it should result ultimately in fewer supply chain issues. And the 3 years that they had, FDA says it should create a harmonized universal language of food traceability. The Food Industry Association and National Grocers Association came out against it, as you probably would imagine, seeing things a little bit differently, citing the quote, tremendous investment of time and resources, and also the FDA maybe exceeded its authority by issuing those regulations. So I think that's going to be a big topic. It's just a traceability within supply chains in the consumer goods space. And I think that leads nicely into today's guest. Intro to today's guest is Michael Johnson, CEO of Metrc. This is a company that's track and trace throughout the legal cannabis industry, mainly on behalf of state governments. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited. Certainly having conversations about traceability and CPG is right up our alley here at Metrc, and certainly something we're already doing at I think a pretty successful level with a fairly seamless interpretation of what those rules can look like at a very granular level for a highly regulated industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for those not familiar with Metrc, why don't you just give us the quick overview of who you are, what you do?
Absolutely. Metrc is a software platform that is primarily in the regulatory environment, and the vast majority of our customer base is in the cannabis space. And so we will sell our offering to states that are trying to regulate legal cannabis. We then come in and kind of are a part of that organization or part of that infrastructure and really the backbone of the compliant cannabis commerce ecosystem. Our advanced track and trace technology ensures that all the regulatory and corporate stakeholders can accurately gather, utilize transaction data in order to protect public health, to grow the legal market, to protect tax revenue, so on and so forth. And I really want to emphasize the public health part on this because this is really the most critical element with what we focus on and what we think is most important when you're talking about a substance of that I think has been a little bit hotly debated in terms of the cannabis space, but it's making folks comfortable with cannabis, making folks comfortable with the regulatory environment is certainly something that we put at the forefront of our mission.
That makes sense. So the governments want to make sure the product is safe and it's not tampered with, and they want to know what's in the product so it's not harmful. I mean, how often, from let's say seed to sale, does a piece of information need to go into the system normally? I mean, it's sure it varies state by state, but just how much information actually it needs to be transmitted?
It's actually a lot more complex than just state by state. You get into what's being produced. So you start with the plant. Plant's grown and generally identified as a viable plant when it reaches a certain height, and those regulations are going to change state by state. And then once the plant reaches its level of viability, a variety of different data sources are captured along the way in terms of when the plant is moved, where it physically is located. When you're talking about hundreds of thousands of plants, sometimes it's actually very important. When you trim the plant, when you're adding additives, pesticides, fertilizers, things of that nature, when the plant's harvested, how much it weighs after it's cured, it's packaged, processed, sent to somebody else. There's over 350 discrete events that could potentially occur in the supply chain, although most are actually quite a bit less than that 350 number.
It's quite a large amount of information, and I found it interesting. I mean, why don't you walk us through, how many states is cannabis legal in, and how many of those states are using your software currently, which I think was pretty impressive, and sort of what's enabled you to gain the market share that you have.
Yeah, there's 39 legal adult use states in the country. We have about 2/3 of those. Our platform is the only platform that exists that is solely focused on trying to create the very best regulatory supply chain solution. And so for us, that's really been the driver and the differentiator. We also have couple our software with robust use of RFID technology that enables folks, inspectors, to be able to go out to a cultivation and do a full 100% inspection in a matter of minutes, just using RFID readers. Similar concepts when you get into the CPG elements, the packaged goods, as they move through the supply chain. And so this definitely helps create a much broader and a much stronger compliant ecosystem. It's a lot harder, as you might imagine, to counterfeit an RFID tag than it would be for some other identifier. But it also allows for dramatic efficiencies for folks that are in the space to take advantage of RFID, seeing as how it's already included in the tags that are government required.
Yeah, so it's really kind of a comprehensive solution. What do you do to make sure that this software and data is secure and that there's not any downtime?
We spend a ton of time on trying to ensure that we've created a secure environment. Each state is actually a separate, unique environment, which is very different than a traditional SaaS platform. We're pretty tight in terms of who has access to that. Cybersecurity is really something that every software company and really every company in general should pay close attention to. And so we've been able to not have any material issues so far. We constantly pay attention and are trying to add to our investment and understanding and make sure we're getting ahead of the curve for any of the latest and most impactful risks. Actually forgot your second question. I'm sorry.
I mean, just to make sure that there's not any downtime as well. I mean, in addition to just sort of having downtime for rework and those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like any enterprise system, it's not as quick as typing into Google. Performance is an area that we've extremely focused on in the last 12 months and something that we're paying very close attention to. In the near future, it should be as quick as possible because so many businesses are really reliant on a performant metric system. So we pay very close attention to that. We do have, a 99.9% uptime. But really, I pay a lot more attention to a functional uptime, and that's how quick transactions get processed. And so for us, making improvements, and we've made dramatic improvements, as I mentioned, but continuing to make improvements such that we're as lightning quick as possible to support the speed of commerce is absolutely critical.
Yeah, what can you tell me about the RFID tags and sort of how has cost come down? I mean, my understanding is the cost of that has come way down, and that's why you hear about it so much in warehouses and logistics. But any other insights for someone who wants to adopt RFID and say their warehouse?
It depends on what you're solving for. I mean, costs are certainly going to go down as much as anything's ubiquitous. But I'll say during the COVID period, it was really hard to find chips. We do a combination of both a completed RFID tag sourcing and then also inlay sourcing that we will pass to third-party producers. So we've tried to insulate ourselves in a variety of different ways such that when there are supply chain disruptions, we're in the best possible position. I would argue that costs are going to go down, but they're going to be reflective based on what your use case is. And so our use case is primarily agricultural in nature, and the substrate that contains the RFID inlay has to be really robust, be able to handle humidity, massive amounts of heat, direct contact with soil. It's going to get wet a lot, as you can imagine. Cannabis, it's the drying period. So the dry periods and the wet periods are very important. Too much humidity, too much moisture, it's going to create one of I think the most troubling concerns, I guess, in the overall agricultural part, which is mold. And so cannabis can certainly attract mold. So our tags and the substrate associated with those tags really have to be strong to protect that. And so the inlays inside of that variety of different kinds of substrates. And as we try and pay more attention to sustainable substrates, those costs are actually going up, not down.
That's really great insight. I didn't really understand all that complexity with having to sort of withstand the elements there. I also want to ask you about just the market for storing data. I mean, you can collect a tremendous amount of data. Just what are you seeing in the market for storing data?
For us, there really isn't one. And so the data that we're collecting on behalf of the state governments is the state government and the licensees. And so they hold their data. We're certainly able to help them facilitate meaningful insights from their data and try and find opportunities for our software to be able to make that data more accessible. Everybody likes to see a nice analytical tool, and so we're working pretty hard at trying to build something a little bit more robust inside of the Metrc system, such that operators and state governments are able to make some more sense of their data. But the data overall is theirs, and we really want to do the best we can to be great stewards of that data.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's nice that's not one of your costs. I guess the state government, so they employ you for a number of years. It's a contract that's in a number of years, I would imagine, and it does seem like the safest thing for a state government to do that's gets into legalizing cannabis would be to do business with the largest player in the space. You had a couple of press releases about some conquest business. where you took business from a competitor. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I said we feel that Metrc has become the backbone of the industry and the standard for which the industry can operate. And we think that we can provide really meaningful solutions to all participants, over 39,000 of our currently existing legal licensees, through the Metrc ecosystem. We can expand that to the rest of the country to help facilitate that standard. Again, we're really focused on the regulatory compliance element and trying to create the best solution so that compliance is as frictionless as possible, and the rails that the ecosystem is able to operate on is as effective and as strong as possible. So Metrc's focused on that makes us the only party that's focused in that arena, and we take it very seriously. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to represent a state government in trying to help protect public health and protect the ecosystem of their industry. We take it very, very seriously, and I couldn't be more proud of Metrc for being able to hold that bar and hold that flag for those states.
I think you said your clientele is you primarily deal with the cannabis industry. Is it sort of what other industries do you do?
Yeah, we've done a ton of different things over the years. So Metrc is actually kind of a 30-year-old startup, which is super interesting. Got its start in CPG, in fresh food, a couple different supply chains. We're actually based in Lakeland, Florida, which is a huge distribution center in Florida. Distribution, as you know, in Florida can be quite challenging. Lakeland's right in the center of the state, so a lot of agriculture, a lot of distribution. That's how Metrc began, and that's why it was such a seamless fit into the cannabis space. But we've also worked in police evidence rooms, air cargo transportation, fresh food, as I mentioned before, like strawberries, and even frozen food, like one of the original use cases for what is now kind of emerged and what gave birth to the Metrc system was frozen shrimp. So there's a lot of opportunity, we think, to kind of expand and push further down the path into regulatory supply chains, especially those that really want to get as seamless as possible with the use of RFID for passive data collection.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We end up talking a lot about Lakeland, Florida, at FreightWaves for all the reasons you mentioned. Its importance there. I wanted to ask you also just about the appetite for raising capital in this space. Maybe it's almost a two-part question, right? I mean, the appetite for investors to invest in SaaS business, leveraging RFID, and then those that are interested in something that touches the cannabis space. But we're just interested to any insight you have there.
We're very fortunate to have some great investors behind us and been with us since 2018. In addition to the founders that have been here since longer than that, Tiger Global's the largest venture capital firm in the world. So we've been very fortunate. But as we grow, we continue to evaluate opportunities to kind of expand our cap table to see if we can bring some more folks into the business that we think can make us smarter. I mean, there's always another opportunity out there. There's always another frontier. There's always somebody that's out there that's smarter than you are. And so we pay close attention to those opportunities. They emerge. It's a little bit of a harder market, I think, for a lot of folks right now. And as you mentioned, cannabis is even tighter. There was certainly what some would call a green wave for a bit of time. And really, I think the market is maturing quite a bit to where so many folks got into it, and frankly, some just won't make it. And so we've been really cautious and tried to be optimistic about what we think we can accomplish, and also start to really have good timing and pay close attention to where the kind of the best bang for our buck is. But we want to make sure that we're building something here that gets to a meaningful level of profitability, growth, and sustainability. And we think we'll do just fine by those that choose to invest in our space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have the advantage of being the incumbent with so many states already. Interesting, call yourself a 30-year-old startup too. Is any anecdotes that you've heard from customers that they learn from the data that they from your system, either about things that weren't being taxed properly, or exceptions, or just any sort of anecdotes that they sort of derived from the insights. I'd be interested to hear any of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that public health is really the most important thing we pay attention to. There's a tremendous amount of testing that goes into cannabis, and something that we pay really close attention to facilitate both the testing process and then also what happens after the testing results kind of come through. And so sometimes they're great results, and the COA, as we call it, is widely available and certainly helps educate consumers. But sometimes there are challenges, and those challenges lead to pretty massive recalls. And so if you think about some of the more scary recalls in the greater agricultural space, like a romaine lettuce outbreak of I believe it was E. coli, you don't have that type of situation in the cannabis space. And that's not because cannabis doesn't have the same issues. In fact, it does, and magnitude's greater. But because the traceability functionality that exists within Metrc allows us to be able to see and be able to show both the state regulators and also the licensees exactly where each one of their products are, exactly which plants might be affected, be able to identify where anything is at any point in time, certainly has helped facilitate and ultimately save the industry hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. So I would say we're most proud of making sure that we're protecting public health, but also supporting the legal ecosystem by minimizing the financial burden of those recalls.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it just seems like, the more of this data that's collected at various stages of the supply chain, you can eliminate, bad actors. Seems like you can just, if there are issues with the product, you can identify those issues quicker. So, there aren't more people consuming, a bad product while they try to figure out what the issue is. So all these things I think are really helpful. Is there anything I'm forgetting to ask you? Just sort of based on my lack of knowledge of the business. I mean, it seems like you have a lot of great opportunities here to grow.
So we're just another software company. It just happens to have been that we found some really unique opportunities inside the cannabis space. I think a lot of people ask us what's it like to be part of the cannabis business. We have people that are active, I'm sure, and partake in cannabis, and many that don't. It really is like no other business, like every other business that I've been a part of. What we're doing is trying to solve for a need that the government, each state government, identifies as something that's sometimes statutorily required, as track and trace is statutorily required in 38 states. So we're trying to create the very best software solution that enables the state regulators to be effective, but also makes it possible for folks that participate in the ecosystem to be very successful. And over 70% of the users of Metrc do not actually use another third-party system, which is really impactful when you think about the fact that we're primarily here to facilitate regulatory compliance, but we really are the backbone of how businesses operate inside of the cannabis spectrum.
Yeah, I'm sure that drives a tremendous amount of stickiness and very little churn, I'm sure, if any. So yeah, really interested to hear about this. And for anyone who wants to learn more and reach out directly to you, how would they do that?
So feel free to shoot me an email. I want to hear from anybody and everybody that I can support. My email address is michael.johnson@metrc.com. You can learn more about Metrc at metrc.com. Metrc is METRC. The I is missing because that's how tech companies have to be, right? So it's a great space. It's a great company, great people, and we're super happy to be a part of a growing industry. And I couldn't be more appreciative of you welcoming me on today.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, good to meet you, and interested to hear about this. And we'll keep in touch. Hopefully, have you out again after next time you book a new government contract. You'll have to come on and tell us about it. If anyone needs anything from me, you can reach out at mbaudendistel@freightwaves.com. And hope everyone has a great day.